Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. This video we're going to briefly discuss the National Visa Center, aka the NVC. What is it? How does it operate? We're going to be discussing this specifically within the context of family immigration. So we're talking spousal, fiancé visas, stepchildren, things like this. Children for that matter, especially if they're unable to get a consular report of birth abroad, that kind of immigration. So within specifically the family context, we're going to be talking about NVC. National Visa Center is, I kind of call it the middle link in the U.S. visa process. In a way, the U.S. visa process, at least for spouses and fiancés of U.S. citizens, is a two-phase process, and then NVC is right there in the middle. You've got Department of Homeland Security's USCIS, which is going to go ahead and adjudicate the underlying petition. Then on the backside, you have to deal with the visa application at the United States consulate. Say, for example, if we're talking Thailand, that's going to be here in Bangkok. The consular section of the U.S. Embassy here in Bangkok, I should say. National Visa Center sits in the middle of those two. The National Visa Center, it's under the auspices, it's under the jurisdiction of the Department of State, but it's essentially kind of a clearinghouse, for lack of a better term. They take in petitions from USCIS, and then they route them to the appropriate embassy or consulate abroad. And in immigrant visa cases, so we're talking spouses of U.S. citizens, I-130 cases, the NVC is going to, it actually fulfills a documentation gathering function. You send in various documents and fill out various documents online, send them into NVC. They do sort of a cursory, well, not cursory, they examine the documentation, make sure everything's in order, pursuant to their due diligence obligations of reviewing the case, and then they go ahead and set an interview and forward the matter on to the U.S. Embassy abroad. In spousal visa cases that are filed in the U.S. through USCIS lockbox in the United States, NVC is a fairly important part of the process because, again, they have this sort of preliminary adjudication function prior to the case going to an embassy abroad for interview and final visa issuance, presumably final visa issuance. In the K1 category, the NVC is, again, it's really a clearinghouse function. They receive the approved I-129F and basically route the case onward to, again, if we're talking Thailand, the U.S. Embassy here in Bangkok. So again, it's a fairly simple process of dealing with NVC. In fact, you don't really deal with NVC at all during the K1 process. A final thing to note are so-called local filings. Thailand is sort of an exceptional country because there is a local USCIS office in Thailand. And as a result of that, under certain limited, narrow circumstances, a case for marriage visa benefits can be filed here in Thailand. As a result of that, when you're dealing with a local filing, because it would be rather redundant to have a case go, I think this is the thinking, because it would be rather redundant for the case to go from USCIS here in Thailand, presuming approval, okay, the case has been approved by USCIS, they're going to send it all the way back to the United States for NVC to send it all the way back across the street to the embassy. That would be sort of a waste of time and resources, and for that reason, NVC isn't such a large factor when dealing with these matters in a local filing context. But that being said, depending on the kind of case you're dealing with U.S. immigration, NVC can be a fairly significant component in the process, or as I said, like the K1, they can be a fairly minor component from the standpoint of the petitioner and beneficiary's perspective because, again, they just sort of route the case onward to the appropriate embassy or consulate. So depending on the very unique facts of a given case and the type of petition being sought, the NVC can have different aspects. A final note, the K3. The K3 is a supplemental marriage visa petition, which is generally filed as a supplement to an underlying I-130. The K3 was invented, and you can check out on our channel, there's a whole nother video specifically talking about the K3. But just to get specific to the K3 and how it relates to NVC, pursuant to the provisions of the Life Act that created the K3, This was created at a time where essentially I-130 cases, there was such a backlog, and there was also such a, frankly, in relative terms, the K-1s were processing so much more quickly. They created this supplemental K-3 category where they said, okay, you've got an I-130 on file, you filed this supplemental K-3 application, and we'll put it sort of in the line with the K-1s. And because the K-1s were processing so much more quickly, for various reasons, resources, etc., because they were processing so much more quickly, the K-3, many people for a fairly prolonged period of time were using the K-3 to get their foreign spouse into the United States. About 5 or 6 years ago, National Visa Center created a new policy, essentially, where they said, look, if we get the I-130 first, so if we receive the I-130 before the approved I-130 from USCIS, if we receive that before we receive the approved K-3 petition, we're going to go ahead and just process the I-130, and the K-3 will stay. The terminology for it was administrative closure. We will put that in administrative closure, and the K-3 will essentially sort of be extinguished, for lack of a better term. It's been my experience that for the most part these days, the K-3 as it sits with NVC, it's kind of a redundant filing to a certain extent, but there may be some benefits depending on the specific and unique circumstances of a given case where it might be beneficial to file a K-3. But bear in mind that there's always the possibility that NVC will administratively close the K-3 case because an I-130, the approved I-130, has made it to them prior to the K-3. So again, there's sort of an element of uncertainty associated with the K-3 and the National Visa Center. Dealing with that would probably best be done on a case-by-case basis.